Okay, class, in this video, we're going to go over dynamic inventory list. Up until this point, we've been using a static inventory file. I'm signed in as DevOps, and I am in my Ansible working directory. So this is our inventory file. The problem with this inventory file is every time we add a new computer, we're going to have to manually update this file. So Ansible has some things called plugins. I'm only going to look at the inventory plugins. And these are designed to go out, get a list of all of the hosts for that particular environment, come back and present it in a JSON format. You can have it do OpenStack, OpenShift. You can even use Nmap to go out and query all the machines. You can go to AWS or Azure. You can do Docker machines or Docker Swarm. But the one we're going to use is made by a third party and it'll query Active Directory, LDAP. So what we're going to do is set that up right now. So the first thing we need to do for this plugin is to install a Python plugin called, a Python module called Python-LDAP. Before we can do that, we need to install some prerequisite software. So I'm going to do sudo yum-y install Python 36 Devil and open LDAP Devil. Now that that's installed, I'm going to install the actual module. Sudo Python 3. We're going to use the Python installer to install this module. That Python installer is a module itself. It'll give you a warning saying you shouldn't install it by root, but that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to create an inventory plugin directory. Now we have a global one, but we're going to make one for a local for our user account. Or I could add it to the global location. I'm just going to use this location. Now if I look at my current plugins, the type of document we're going to look at is inventory plugins as opposed to a module. And I'm going to list everything. I don't have anything for LDAP right now. So let's cd into that directory we just created. And we're going to use Wget to retrieve a plugin from GitHub. I was hoping that they already had a plugin, Ansible already had a plugin for Active Directory, but they didn't. And again, guys, you can't be close with the typing. You have to be exact. So if you have a typo, just go over with a fine tooth comb just to make sure you don't have a typo. So if I list, I now have that plugin. So now if I query Ansible for plugins, I can now see that I have that plugin. Before I didn't have that. So all you have to do is drop it in that directory and you have it. There's two directories. You could do the global one under Etsy, or you could use one inside of your home folder. When we installed Ansible, it created this for us. So this only affects our user accounts, or if you put it in the global location under Etsy, everyone has that. Okay, so now we're going to go into our working directory. So our plugin's installed. I need to create a folder called inventory. But the problem is I have a file called inventory, so I can't do that. So what I'm going to do is rename inventory backup just for the time being. Now I'm going to make my directory for inventory. Now I'm going to move that inventory backup into the inventory directory, but I'm going to rename it at the same time back to inventory. When you rename a command, you move it from one name to another. So all I'm doing is moving it from this name to this name, but inside of this directory. So now I did the tree command to look at all the files. I have a inventory folder with our static inventory file inside. So if I cat, there's our static inventory file in the new location. So the next thing I want to do is I need to write a YAML script that will use that plugin that we just installed. So I'm going to go into that. Actually, I don't need to go into that directory, but I'm just going to go into code, inventory, LDAP, YAML. You can't use YML. You have to use YAML. And I'll explain this when I get done with creating the file. So I'm going to do this YAML script. And again, all this information is also on the GitHub of the guy who created the plugin. His documentation on how to install it was incorrect. It didn't work for me the way he had you install it. So I went and searched Ansible docs and I figured out how to install it. It took like 5 hours to get it to work, but I finally got it to work. And I think the method that I'm using is relatively simple. So again, it's a YAML file, so it has to start with 3 dashes. So I'm going to refer to the plugin. It's a dictionary item, LDAP inventory. The domain name has to be in single quotes because that's how the guy who designed the plugin wanted it. The username we're going to use is password is in double quotes. You might be able to switch them, but I never tested that. So you might be able to use single quotes there. I don't know. I'm going to search our entire domain. So I'm going to supply the distinguished name format of our domain, contoso.com. Now I'm going to save this file. Okay, so I'm going to look inside of our inventory directory. So I have two files, our static inventory and our LDAP inventory script. This script will use that plugin, and that plugin requires the Python plugin LDAP, Python LDAP. That's what we installed first. It will query Active Directory and return, which is LDAP. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And it will return one big JSON list of all the inventory items, both from the static list and from our dynamic list. And it's going to do it in alphabetical order. So be aware that if you have a machine in both, the last one is going to count. So be careful with the order in which you name these things. This could be named anything you want. If you want this to run first, make sure it has a lower letter in the alphabet than this one. So be aware that it does run in an alphabetical order. So basically, I'm telling Ansible now to use both of these sources for inventory, not just our static list. So the last step we need to do to get this working is we need to tell Ansible to use both of those files. So I'm going to do code. I forgot to press enter. Okay, so right now it's looking for that static file. If I just put a slash at the end of this, maybe I did hit enter, it's just laggy. That's going to indicate the directory. So it'll go into that directory, read our static inventory file, then execute that YAML script to query Active Directory and return all the computers from Active Directory. So I'm going to save this. So we're going to go over to Active Directory now and make some changes there. This plugin is designed to query something called organizational units. And then those organizational units become groups. So it will dynamically create the groups that you want based on your OU structure. So I'm going to sign into the DC with our standard password. I'm going to go to Active Directory users and computers. I'm going to create one OU called Linux. The reason why I'm doing this is because I already have a Linux group with all the vars set up for it. And I also have an OU, a group set up called Windows with all the vars associated with it. We had that Windows file where we put in the user account name, we put in WinRM, um, all that kind of stuff, so it knows how to connect to these Windows machines. So I'm going to go to the computer container. That's a container. This is an OU. You can't apply group policies to a container. So I'm going to move the MS server to Windows. I'm going to move RHS1 and RHS2 to Linux. Then I'm going to create a third one just for giggles. I'm going to create another OU called group 3. And I'm just going to create fake computer accounts. fhost 5, fhost 6, all the way to 9. So basically, we created 3 OUs: Linux, which has um, RHS1, RHS2, Windows, which is MS, and we got those 3 computers from the computer container, and then we created group 3. If you remember in the last lab, we had group 1 and 2. 5, 6, and 7. 5 is in group 1 and 2. 6 and 7 are in group 2, and 8 and 9 are only in group 3. Also note that I put uppercases here. When this gets copied over to Ansible, when they query this Active Directory, it's going to make everything lowercase. So I'm going to save this and exit out of code, and I'm going to do Ansible inventory and list. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top of this file, and I'm going to explain it. So I'm going to go back to the DC just to show you something. There was already an OU called domain controllers with our DC in it. So it pulled this information from the host vars. If I look at our directory structure, I'm going to do a tree of the current directory. I have a group vars directory with a file holding Linux vars. We did that in earlier labs. A group vars directory holding Windows vars. A host var directory holding our vault backup and our old vault backup. Now you might have RHS1 here because you did a lab that I didn't do. We have our files directory with some files that we copied over. There's our inventory directory with our static inventory file and our script. So I'm going to go back to our list. This thing is finicky on the virtual machines. Okay, so this first part is host vars. Remember, this is part of Windows box, so it will get the Windows vars. This is part of the Windows group, so it will get the Windows vars. This DC is part of the Windows group, it'll get the Windows vars, and so on. I'm going to skip this for now. This is going to get all the Linux vars and everything like that. So again, it's in JSON format, everything's in dictionary format. So then we have our actual host. So it's showing me all of them. I have a group called domain controllers with one computer in that group called DC. I had a group called group 1. I have a group called group 2. and I have a group called Linux. Now, notice that in this Linux group, it also added the same machines, but the short name that this right here and this right here was from the script that it pulled from Active Directory. It just pulls in the name, the short name. There's our there's our member servers. We created that group, and that was had children with two groups. If you created an OU structure, I just shut it down by accident. I'll let that come up. If I create an OU structure where one OU was in another, it would make that as a child group. You know, one group who had members of being of other child. I can't believe I just crashed my machine. I'm gonna give it a minute to boot. I'm gonna pause. Okay, so I did Ansible. So if I do a list, let me do a tree. I can see everything is still there. Okay, so I'm gonna do Ansible inventory list. Again, it's in JSON format. We talked about group one from our static list, group two from our static list, the Linux group that was in our static list. We also had a Linux OU on the DC, so it merged both those together. This is from the DC dynamically. This is from my static list. DC static list. This was that member servers from the static list that had two other groups. These two are ungrouped, meaning they don't fall in any other group. Then here's my Windows group, which I had in my static file, and I also have an OU. So this group is a compilation of both the static inventory list and my dynamic list. These three right here are from my static list. This is from my dynamic list. This is from my static list. And again, it created a group called domain controllers because I had an OU called domain controllers. And then there's a computer for DC. So because this is in the Windows group, it's going to get the Windows var right here. As long as it's in the Windows group, it's going to get those Windows variable, which means we're going to use WinRM to connect, not SSH. We're going to use this administrator and we're going to authenticate using Kerberos. So I'll be able to do Ansible MS from my dynamic group, and I'm just going to do win ping. Or I could do from my static list. This was from my dynamic list. This was from my static list. Guys, if we only went with just a static list, it would be too much to support Ansible. This way we can have a little script that runs out and finds all of our computers. Here I'm just listing all of my hosts in INI format. Here I'm going to list all my hosts in JSON format. Or I can make a nice graphic tree. It shows you all the groups, who's under that group. Here is a group with two children groups and all the hosts under those two children groups. Um, and of course, the all is an implied group and the ungroup is an implied group. You don't manually set those. If you're not in any group, you automatically get added to this group. If you exist, you automatically get added to the all group. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else I can show you about this. I don't think so, but that's it for this video. We still have parallel processing to do in this chapter, so I'm going to start working on that to hopefully get it done today so this chapter is done. Guys, it took me a while to figure out this plugin. The instructions that the guy put out there just didn't work at all. I know it seems relatively simple what we did in this lab, but it just took a long time to get it to work. Okay, thank you. I'm going to upload this video and I will see you in the next video.